We had like a term sheet sign at one point. Imagine you sign a term sheet. It was for $1 million, and this is someone I cannot say, but they are well regarded in the venture community. And he pulled out of the term sheet because he got a call from another startup founder, which I'm not going to comment on how that company is doing, but you can imagine from my tone how it's not necessarily, doing great, and that he thought it could be a conflict, essentially. And so he recused, which is very rare, by the way. Like, you have a sign. Imagine you're fundraising, and $1 million at that point was like half of a round, and like, hey, you signed the term sheet. Cheers, cheers, cheers. We crushed. Yeah, let's go back to building. Well, like, let's finish the round, but we were probably gonna raise like 1.5 or something. So it's pretty much done, especially if that big check is in. And then they're like, psych, go back, start from the beginning, and then you went from being like a hot company that is gonna close around to basically like a distressed asset.
The following is a conversation with Xavier Pladevall, co-founder of Index, a powerful dashboarding and data visualization tool. We talked about great craftsmanship and design. We talked about what it takes to build a best-in-class product in a category, and we talked about the importance of having a laugh and having fun while on the journey to entrepreneurial success. I hope you enjoy. What kind of kid were you growing up? Where did you grow up? And what was your childhood like?
Yeah, I'll invoice you for the therapy session afterwards. Or you can invoice me, But okay, so let's take it all the way back. I was born and raised in the DR, in Dominican Republic. My dad was from Spain. My mom was from DR. Again, growing up, like, that's pretty normal. I feel like when I moved to the US, people are like, oh my God, that's so like exotic. I was like, that's pretty common back home. So yeah, I was born and raised there my entire childhood, like, K through 12, which I'm sure we'll get into because like Ed, my co-founder, we've known each other since we were like, 3 years old. Went in high school, played soccer in the soccer team together, started an entrepreneurship club, which in hindsight is like kind of funny, but at the time we had no idea what we were doing. And yeah, I mean, childhood was great. Like, I like to tell people that, how founders sometimes are like, kind of like not well adjusted. I was like very loved. My parents loved me, like I was but if anything, I feel like being in such a small place, like for context, my graduating high school class was like 40 people, Wow. Yeah, it was pretty small. So I feel like looking back, like my parents were also like always like, oh yeah, of course you're gonna be the best. It's like, of course, like you just, it's like, it was like not even like an assumption that was not a possibility. So like, it's like, of course you can do anything. It's like, so I feel like that was very useful. When it came to kind of like going to college in the U.S. and which that was a reality shock. Because you go from being like a top dog in your little teeny tiny third world country high school to being like in such like such a competitive space. But yeah, I think that has been super helpful as a founder, honestly. And yeah, it was great. I mean, played a ton of soccer, I did a bunch of like weird jobs, which in hindsight, like I also tell people now, like for example, my dad is an architect, my grandpa was an architect, his dad. And so, I don't know, my first job was like when I was like, 10, 11. It was on a construction site, which, violates every child labor law probably. But it was super fun, it was like very different vibe than like, coding. But yeah, it was great, it was a great childhood. And I'm sure we'll get into kind of like all the stuff like around college. I think one other thing that it's a little interesting and fun, I feel like when I hear a lot of founders talk, they always say how I started coding when I was like blah, blah, blah. I actually kind of did not like it at all. Like in high school, we were, me and Ed, we would have like computer science class and we would just like speed run it. Because if you speed run it, like you would have time at the end to play like games and stuff. Like the teacher would let us do that. So I was good, but I was never like, super kind of like, oh my God, yes. Like, I love this. What I did love was, I don't know if you ever played with like iPods and like iPod Touch and like early iPhones that you could jailbreak them. Oh, dude, I had like Pokemon and like GameCube games and like I had Windows on my PSP. Like I would just jailbreak like everything, and that was to me kind of like the sort of like the idea that you could sort of like manipulate software to do whatever you want, you know, and like use this tool to do something completely different. I think that was my gateway drug, you know, into kind of like software and all of that stuff. But yeah, man, other than that, pretty chill childhood, like pretty normal.
Totally. I mean, just, right off the bat, I can tell sort of where sort of your sense of design comes from. Your dad was an architect, your grandpa was an architect.
My mom was an interior designer,
Right.
if that helps. Yeah. I probably would have been an architect if I was not into like software tech and liked it so much, to be honest.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you're architecting an experience, but we'll get into all that.
You can always spin it. You can always find a way of like spinning it in a way that makes sense, you know?
So I'm curious. So first of all, were they teaching you, like, were you taking English classes in DR, or
Yeah.
how did that work?
Yeah, basically in DR, we took, I'm sure like, anyone listening, that they might have done like AP classes and like, IB. Like I did IB. Like I went to the international British school, whatever, and then like there was an American school and they did AP classes. So in that sense, it was like pretty sort of like well structured. I will say, which is kind of funny, when people notice that if they talk to my high school friends, like some people have more accent than other people, and I feel that that's more like the internet kid, like watching a ton of YouTube, like growing up, like I was obsessed with like, I mean, a bunch of things, but I feel like being very chronically online helps kind of like the cultural aspects of it. But even today, I have some gaps, where it's like I clearly did not grow up here, like people will make a reference, like I can't remember to like specific things now, but it happens where it's like, oh, you never watched that? And I was like, no, like, it's like complete cultural gap, but yeah, no, for the most part, it was like, it was very much aligned towards going to the US or Europe, which is like what a lot of kids back home do.
What were some of your favorite classes in high school?
Favorite classes in this is fun. So typically, which I don't know if it's gonna make, I mean, it makes sense when you get to know me, I guess, but every class was like, okay, I have to kind of like actually put some sense of effort into this thing, The only two where that was not the case was history, which will affect the college thing, and kind of like, I've applied a lot of that same sort of like mentality to how I think about startups. And then senior year for IB, we had to take an elective, which was like art, French, or business. Which, fun fact, I love the three of them. Like I legitimately would have taken those instead of like other things if I could, but I had to pick one, so I did business. Those are the only two classes where I was like, oh, I felt like, kind of like God mode. I couldn't, like, when people say like, oh, they didn't study and aced it, like that, those were the only, everything else was effort, like everything else is like, I had to study for my English and my math and physics and all that stuff. But history, for whatever reason, and the business management it was just like cruising. So I guess you like the things you're good at, which is also something I think it's one of the main lessons for startups, like that whole idea of passion is like, you're going to be passionate about whatever you're good at, and there's a lot to that, and like there's many levels to it, and like it's something I keep coming back to because it's like, damn, if you're good at something, you'll kind of like, fall in love with it. So those two probably.
Awesome. And so you eventually obviously graduated high school and you made it into college. You made it into an American university, so you came over. What was like your mentality going into college?
Okay, so let's see if I can think of that. It's one of those things where one of the things that I tell myself and I tell everyone that I can, and again, it's almost a reminder for myself, is to always think bigger and like be more ambitious, and you're never ambitious enough even if you think you are being very ambitious. So to give you some context, again, I come from a tiny country, right? Like it's like, and I was very lucky to go to like probably the best school in the whole country. But to give you an idea, like if you had one kid going to an Ivy League school a year in the country, that was a great year, Like, it was not a thing. We had college counselor, but it was like, like you had to be very proactive about everything. And American school was probably a bit better about that type of stuff, just because they were more oriented towards that. And, a lot of our kids went to Europe. But so you have to be, you have to be very focused on that. And in my case, I was lucky where I was like, I don't know, self-driven enough where I told my parents like, hey, I should probably do like summer camps in the US, because like, I need to figure out like, okay, I thought it would give me an edge, and I was like, hey, like I want to understand what are these like colleges. So I came to the U.S. for like a few summers. I went to Georgetown in D.C. Loved Georgetown. Like I was literally like telling someone that went there, I think like last weekend. Love the campus. I could literally walk you through the Georgetown campus with my eyes closed. Like I think it's beautiful. The neighborhood, the part of town, it's perfect. But at the time, I would have had to basically go study international relations because that's what they're really good for. No, no shade on any of the other schools. But if you're gonna go to Georgetown, you go to like study international relations. And then I spent another summer at Penn in Philly, and that was I wanted to go there. But then I really kind of didn't vibe with it. And so anyways, like that was in the back of my mind. Applied to schools. I really didn't think I was, gonna get into as many, which goes to the ambition point of it. And when I got into Columbia, it was between that and Penn, it was pretty obvious that Columbia was the better choice. Because at Penn, I would have been a business major, which in hindsight was not gonna be a smart decision, But it's just one of those things. Like looking back, I was like, I should have just applied to everything and be more. I don't know, be more ambitious. It's funny because like the only restriction my parents put me like, don't apply to any West Coast schools because that's too far, which is kind of hilarious because like I live here now, so it's like. Yeah, it's just like all those things. But we corrected that with my sister, and like I have a sister who's 2 years younger, and I was like, you're my project now. It's like you're gonna run. And I mean, she ended up going to Columbia as well. But like, I kind of like try to fix a lot of the things that I didn't get right with myself, with her. But yeah, it was. I think in hindsight I got lucky, and I think it was the right choice. But yeah, it was great, honestly.
Do you think Columbia University's curriculum or the way it's structured is a little bit more flexible for you to pursue your interests?
Yeah.
I guess relative to Penn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I've not thought about this in a long time. Yes. So I feel like if you talk to most Columbia kids, they have a love-hate relationship with the school. It's not your big kind of like sports school. Like the spirit is not like that. But everyone's very defensive of the school. It's like we like to trash talk a little bit, but it's like you cannot trash talk about it. People get very defensive, and I think it's because it pushes you. Like if you take it seriously. I think all of these schools are great, and like you could really, to be honest, I think American schools in general are very flexible compared to like European ones where it's like much more like regimented stuff. And I think all of them are great. I think what Columbia did very good is like it forces the exposure, if that makes sense. So whereas like at Penn, I would have had to like, I could have taken classes, and it could have been flexible. Say for all the other schools, the way Columbia works, for the audience, is like you have to take core class, like there's like the core, so you have to take like art history and music history, and every freshman takes the same literature class, so everyone reads like the classics. Sophomore year you take the same philosophy class, and so those are things that I could have maybe like not been exposed to had I been left to my own devices, and things that I'm super thankful for. Like for example, like art history class, I thought I was in easy mode in history. By the way, history at the college level, especially at Columbia, is very different than high school history. It's like a bunch of like type A kids that want to go to law school. My close friends, but like, like it's a very different vibe. But for example, art history, I loved it. I would have like, had I thought about it, and again, hindsight is 2020, I would have probably done CS and art history. So much more fun. It is like, it's also not as hard as history, to be quite honest, at least for me. So yeah, it's one of those things where you're very thankful for that, because it's one of those things that I can tell really changed how I think about things, and kind of like worldview and stuff. And that I noticed when I talk to folks that maybe had a more technical only background, like you can just tell, like you can just tell. It's just like a different vibe. Yeah.
Totally. So you studied history, CS, and neuroscience.
Yeah, it was a minor. At the end, I just like was able to kind of like tack it in, kind of like for fun,
Couple classes there, awesome. And apparently you wrote a thesis,
Yeah.
sort of on Moore's law and AI.
Yeah.
Could you give me like a little synopsis
Yes.
if you can remember?
I can give you a little synopsis, not to bore you, but I think in hindsight it was so funny because like I was like I should have invested in at the same time I was reading this thing because to give you context, senior year I try to be a bit of a rebel. For context, history majors typically you have to choose like a core area of focus and then like a subspecialty. I focus on history of science and technology and economic history as a sub focus, whatever. So a little bit niche. Most thesis at Columbia kids are writing on World War II and the Korean War and like whatever. So I was a bit of a rebel. I was like, I'm gonna do something different. And what I was between was like AI and this sort of like OG kind of like how AI kind of like how AI came to be in the U.S., which is why I ended up choosing, or sort of like I was interested always in like bubbles and kind of like economic bubbles and crisis and all that stuff. And I ended up choosing the AI thing. It's a fascinating history. Like for context, the premise of the thesis is like Moore's law, which if you're not familiar with, is this law by this guy that kind of like ran Intel for a long time. That essentially, as the number of transistors doubles every year, essentially compute knowledge increases exponentially, right? And that sort of like guided the roadmap for all those chip makers over time, and it's almost like nothing grows exponentially forever, and it's almost the reason why you have it kind of like underpins technological growth. That's essentially the TLDR. And it's pretty crazy. The really cool aspect of that though is like how involved like the U.S. government was in sort of like making all these things happen. And there's a lot of parallels to now. So for example, like in the 70s, sort of like now people are like very kind of like, oh my God, China and Taiwan and the chips there and like like that sort of like tension. Something similar happened in like the 70s and 80s with Japan, where like the U.S. was like, hey, we need to fund this through DARPA. We need to fund this. DARPA is, sorry, acronyms. It's like government funding for advanced technologies or whatever. And so there's a lot of parallels in there, and it's very cool to see how the role of a government, stuff like that, and also kind of like cycles. Like this stuff takes time. And it was like in the 60s, people were talking about AI, and it was only in the 90s that we were like, oh my God, it's almost here. And then it kind of collapsed. And then, it goes back up and it collapses. But every time it's like a little bit more progress. So yeah, anyways, there's a lot in there. But it's a super interesting space. And it kind of like gives you confidence of like where things are going a little bit. Because you're like, okay, like we've made enough progress here. There's probably something here, and yeah, it was pretty prescient to like, because this was like pre-chat GPT, which is again why I should have probably like, as I was writing my thesis, maybe put any savings that I had on NVIDIA. That was not the case, but yeah, it was really fun.
Awesome. I was going to ask you this towards the end of the talk, but I guess because you brought it up, I might as well just kind of lay it on you. Let's talk about bubbles, because you are very interested in bubbles. You sort of studied that in college. Do you think, based off what you see the past couple of years, do you think we're in an AI bubble? How do you think about this?
Wow, this is like the type of like, Bloomberg News commentary that I think I feel like everyone that you hear talking about this, you should understand what are their motives, because usually like investors, when they talk about this, they are talking their book in some capacity. I have nothing to sell in this regard. So my commentary is based on what I see and without trying to parrot what I've heard before. I think the problem with bubbles, so I can only comment on like the AI stuff really, I think. The crypto world, which seems to be the other side of the equation, I have no idea. Like I literally could not tell you anything. With the AI stuff, I think that there might be bubbles, but it's like I also don't think anyone fully understands, because like if you think about bubbles, like it's not, like with AI, it's not just one bubble. I'll give you an example. Like let's say there's a ton of investments going into AI, right? Like venture capital investors, right? That could be a bubble, right? Which means it's driving the prices up of in this case, equity in those startups, right? So there's a bubble in venture investing in AI. There's also like people investing in like data centers, right, for AI. So usually that gets funded through a combination of equity and credit. There's credit investors. People say there's a credit bubble in AI because essentially you have all this cash kind of like being going towards like building capacity that we don't know if it's going to be used or not. Hopefully yes, but we don't know. So anyways, so these could be separate bubbles that from the outside, it's like there's an AI bubble. Like that's super easy to kind of like just blanket statement say that. I think a much more interesting exercise is like okay, in this space, in this category, where we see an increase in price or activity of some sort, is there a bubble? The only thing that I can opine there is venture, like the venture world, because that's what I have exposure to. And to be honest, as far as I can tell, not really, which I know sounds insane, but it's like the revenue seems to be there, you know? Like, sure, you see all these crazy rounds getting announced on like valuations that are billions of dollars, but he's like, the companies are making hundreds of millions of dollars, you know? It's like real revenue, you know? And it seems to be somewhat durable revenue, so it's not like people are gonna churn tomorrow. So it seems like we could ride it a little bit longer. Again, it's also like I think different from like, you know, public markets, you know, like Nvidia stock. Like that's a complete separate beast, you know, like because again, in the public markets things are much more different. So yeah, it seems like we could keep running for a little bit. Then again, I could be talking my own book, so do your homework, not financial advice, you know. But yeah, I think my TLDR from this is like it's nuanced, and I think you should understand what you're talking about when it comes to like the bubble stuff, because otherwise it's just like shooting the, you know, I don't want to curse, but shooting the, you know, it's like you really don't know what you're talking about, you know, most of the time. So that's why I try to refrain from like, you know, kind of like armchair commentary on, you know, bubbles or whatever it is.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the insight, man. So perfect. So I guess now want to talk about your work experience because we went through college and your thesis. Then you left Columbia and you started working at Meta, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so tell me, like, what were you doing at Meta?
So at Meta, for context, I also interned at Meta 2 summers, and I was like, yep, I'm gonna go there as a new grad. It's gonna be great. Worked on different teams. I was a terrible intern, by the way. Like I was bad. Like in the sense of like I would do my work, but I would get bored, you know, and I would just try and go and work on other teams, you know, like Meta like has always has this kind of like side projects, you know, like they're like like, you know, there's like a, I don't know, video group app. Let's kind of like, you know, do our own version of that, you know. So I worked with that team for a bit, even though it was not my team, you know, and other cool fun stuff. So it was great. It's honestly like what I like to say about Meta is like, at least on the engineering side, it's insane. It's like you know, it's an engineering powerhouse where it's like it feels like they have a social network attached to pay the bills, but it's like there are people working there that are so removed from newsfeed or Instagram or like any of the core products that, you know, like yeah, it feels like its own thing. You know, it feels like it's just like an engineering kind of like company more than anything. So it was great. I think like working at Meta was great. I think my assumption was I was gonna work there for longer, and I got lucky that I was able to moonlight at an investor's office, which is so random, and I was able to see people pitch, and I was like, oh, I could do this now. You know, like I don't think these people are smarter than me, and they're getting funding, so I'm like, okay, I should probably kind of like jump at some point. But yeah, Meta's great. I think it's a great company, and yeah, tons of learnings there, tons of like really smart people.
So you had kind of a glimpse into a lot of data visualization while you were at Meta, and you used something called Unidash.
Yeah.
Right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still alive and kicking today.
Still alive and kicking. So that's Meta's internal data visualization tool.
Yeah.
How much work were you doing with that, and what was your experience using it?
Yeah. So the thesis, which has always been the same, is I spent, and this is true if you were a PM or even an engineer that was embedded into a product team. Again, Meta has a bunch of like data tools that are good for different things. Like there was like Scuba, and like there was like Unidash, and like some are meant for running like really fast queries. Some are meant for super accurate large data sets. Like some are for dashboarding. Some are, so it's again, it's a powerhouse. Like everything's built in house. There's like, for example, and this is all public obviously, but there's Deltoid, which was like A/B experimentation, like still data ish. That tool, there's a company called Statsig that came out of that, and it's a $1 billion company, got acquired by OpenAI recently. And so there was a lot. The commonality was like I spent a lot of time just on the tool, and it was a tool again to sort of like visualize your data. And again, I was always embedded in product teams, so teams wanted to see like, hey, like how is this being used on mobile versus on web? How is this being, or www, how they call it internally? How is it, how are we doing in Canada or Poland, which were markets that you would roll out initially? So like you kind of like, if you saw a graph, no pun intended, of like time spent per tool, it would be like a good chunk would be on your IDE, in your coding environment. A good chunk would be on Unidash, trying to figure out, okay, what am I even trying to debug or look at, or what is my PM saying, like whatever it is. And a good chunk could be like reviewing design files, right, or whatever. So that was one thing where I was like, but those other tools we did not, like Meta did not do, right? Like Meta would have used Sketch at the time, or later on they moved to Figma completely, but like Sketch or even the IDE was not something Meta necessarily built internally. So, but Unidash was built internally, So I was like, wow, like they really had to go out of their way to build this tool internally. So I was like, and again, that's only after the fact when I kind of like thought about that, But it's one of the things in terms of like just like raw time spent, it's a tool I had open every day, basically. So yeah, that was kind of a little bit of a Unidash story there.
Awesome. So I'm curious, so it was sort of a combination because you eventually ended up founding Index, which is your startup. So it was a combination of spending time at a VC firm, seeing founders pitch, as well as seeing, opportunity in maybe fixing or improving the data visualization experience. Which one came first? Were you thinking about doing a company first, or were you like, I want to solve this problem and maybe doing a company?
Yeah, no, 100% company first, 100%. Told you that I started Entrepreneurship Club with Ed at one point. So 100% knew I wanted to start a company. Love the idea of like unlimited upside, and I feel like if you work as an IC, meaning individual contributor, and like you're an engineer or a product manager or whatever, you have fairly well structured kind of like path, and I don't usually enjoy that. With the VC, again, it's one of those things. It's like, how much information do you have? I wish I would have collected more information. I wish I would have stayed longer. It's like I had like a little bit of information, and I made a decision to start a company then because I was like, okay, I've seen enough that I need to know. I wish I had learned more about like go-to-market, distribution, fundraising, and a bunch of other things that I only learned afterwards. So definitely company first. For the thesis part, I think another thing, like a core part of our thesis has always been the best product wins. And I've updated that because before I used to think it was like the best design product. Now I'm just like the best product, period. It's not just design. But the best product wins. And it was like, the thesis is like, hey, listen, every category in business applications, SaaS, whatever you want to call it, every winner, it's a best in class tool. It's not like a generic tool that can do a bunch of things. It does one thing very well. It's typically incredibly well designed, and they're going to win the category. So, for example, at Meta, you cannot use Slack. I don't know now, but I definitely don't think. No, I'm sure you cannot use Slack now. But Instagram did. And so I was like, especially if you're a college kid, I know now college kids use Slack for clubs and stuff, but I was like, oh, this is like clearly the winner, And it was sort of obvious, like Slack was kind of growing. It's not what it is now, but it was like, okay, this is kind of, going. Notion was the same thing. At Meta, we had to use Quip, which is whatever. Whatever. It's a Salesforce thing. I'm pretty sure they use G Suite stuff now, but they fully moved over. But even then, it was like Notion was. I mean, I'm probably one of. I can see my user number. I'm in the first hundreds of users of Notion. It was like pretty obvious. I was like, oh, this is just like a new, like this is just like a 10x better. You know, it's just like a leap better product. Same for Figma. Again, now it's so obvious, but Figma at the time, like Sketch was the thing, you know? And I was like, okay, someone's gonna do that. And I knew that, for example, there was a tool called Tableau, which Meta had licenses to, but we didn't use internally. Only like finance people in the company would use them, to my understanding. And I was like, okay, someone's gonna, and Tableau is a huge company, like $15 billion acquisition by Salesforce. They had gone public before that. So it's big. And so it was like, well, someone's going to build the better Tableau, essentially. And that was kind of like the thesis there, where it's like, hey, this is a tough category, by the way. Tons of people try to build tools. It usually takes a lot of time because you're building a lot of stuff. You know, like you're building not just the dashboarding, now the AI components, but also kind of like the SQL runner and the database connections, and like it's like trying to build Photoshop. You know, you have a lot of things, so it is hard, but it's like, hey, someone's gonna win the category with a product that's really well designed, that can be, and it scales well, by the way. So it can go from like you're a 2-person startup and you can use it to create some basic charts, all the way to like the DoorDash, the Instacarts, the Workdays of the you know the world. You're a huge company, public company, and you can use it. And so that is kind of like the thesis for Index. It's always been the same. And that's why I'm very happy to share about it. And I'm like, it's not like a secret. I was like, listen, if there's anyone else that could do this, I'm like, please go ahead and try. Like, I would challenge you to try and do this. It's incredibly hard. So yeah, that's kind of like the origin story a little bit there.
Beautiful. Okay, so a big component of this strategy is building the best-in-class product for your category. So what components, we talked about great design, great experience, it's got to be fast, it's got to work really well. What components does the best-in-class product have for each category?
Yes, that's a good question in terms of like the other categories as well. I'll tell you what I got out of that analysis and for our space as well. I would caveat that this is probably not true for everyone, right? Like every category might be a little bit different. From our perspective, there are 3 things that were key. So it's like performance, connections, and AI. We updated that because like we thought collaboration was going to be a key component, but it frankly became table stakes. So if there's a laundry list of features, like collaboration, it just goes down, and like it just doesn't make it above the fold. You know, it's just like it's table stakes basically. But those, you know, when I say like call it like UI, because UI there's like the design portion of it, but there's also like again performance, right? Like pure engineering. So just to give you a stupid idea, like a stupid example here, which I know people don't believe me, but if you try any of the classic data visualization tools, you cannot do like Command Z. Like you cannot undo, because that would require doing a round trip to the server because you're sending a new query. What the point is, like they're not built for that. And every step is like incredibly like slow. Just like having little things like that, you know, it's like makes the tool feel a lot faster, and then you can do more things. You can do that extra chart, that extra tweak, that extra thing. You're like, hey, I don't want to like pull my hair out when I'm using this tool. So again, are people going to use a tool because it has dark mode or because it has undo, redo, or this or that? Probably not. But when you add them all up, it's like, okay, this is a clear winner, and that's hard to kind of like, it compounds essentially. So yeah, connections, it's another huge one. Like the ability to manage all this data from different sources, plus databases, it took us a long time. And obviously the AI component of it is you have to nail that. To like, you know, hey, can this like write SQL queries for me? Meaning like the code that runs on the database to generate the, you know, the tables that you need. Can this understand the business, you know, and like how everything works under the hood. That was definitely a key part. So those are the three things from a product perspective. How my mind has evolved as we moved on from the product thing. Like I would have usually stopped there. I think there's a difference between building the best product and building the best company. And I think that is something that my younger version did not realize, where I was like, okay, I went super deep in product. And now it's like, okay, how can you build the distribution side, of the equation? Which, if you're an engineer, like it's so cool, It's like it's almost like a little engine you're trying to build. It's like, okay, what are the channels and how do they convert and like all these things? Because like it doesn't matter if you have a great product if no one knows about it and no one uses it, and you don't have a machine that can bring people in. It just won't work. It's just like it's gonna be a cute project. And I've seen that, by the way, firsthand with other companies. Like I know of a lot of companies, I'm not gonna mention any here, that there are better products, but those founders, for whatever reason, didn't crack the distribution of the product, and they end up being like cute indie projects. But going back to the point, we are ambitious, so we're like, hey, how can we make sure this is a $10 billion company that could go public? And that's another part of the equation that I think it's important. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I see that you're definitely trying to crack or master the distribution side of the business.
LinkedIn is one great example of that. Like it's just one of the it's one of our earliest channels right now. It's not necessarily doing very well, better than what I thought. It's incredibly cringe. You just have to. I mean, dude, the stories that I could tell you about it. People coming out of the woodwork, reaching out about saying like, "Hey, I've seen your LinkedIn content," but it also has great opportunities like this or like any other podcast that I've done or whatever it is. So you just gotta embrace it. It's like, what do you like? If you want to win, it's like, hey, this just comes with the job. It's like it's almost kind of like a part of it. But yeah, it's just like one of many things, and it's how does everything. It's so cool, dude. Honestly, like sales and go to market. If my younger self could hear me saying this, it's crazy, but it's so cool because everything kind of like plays into each other. It's like, hey, how can we use our email outbound and our infra, which is our bread and butter, really, and like a well-oiled machine. How can we use that to sort of like drive traffic to LinkedIn, or how can we use LinkedIn to drive traffic through this, or it's like there's like a lot, to it, and yeah, it's pretty cool. And I think that I'm probably gonna be focusing on that a lot more than even product, just like moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you're definitely excited about basically go to market for the company. One thing that I was really curious to ask you is, obviously a lot of the dashboarding and data visualization work that you've done has been at really high tech companies like Facebook, and obviously we're in SF, which is SaaS central, software central. But how does a product like Index work for a traditional company? Let's say, a company out of Oklahoma or whatever that maybe isn't as high tech.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Yeah. So we have those, and I think we don't obviously disclose like distribution of customers or whatever, but you'd be surprised how, so two things on this. One is like how savvy people are. So for example, some of our biggest customers have been in places where, I was joking, I'm not gonna disclose the location because I don't want to like backtrack any or dox anyone, but it's like somewhere in Florida, that you would never imagine. You're like, wait, what? But they use Snowflake, meaning which is a data warehouse. They use ClickHouse. They use all the tools. Like I feel like underestimating how advanced some of these companies are. And for context, like that example is like they run brick and mortar stores all over the US, like hundreds of locations, right? And they have dashboards for all of them, you know what I'm saying? And they're running from a database, So like that is one example where it's like, it's actually way more distributed and also way earlier than what people think. So it's not like, for example, we don't even sell into true enterprise here for any go-to-market nerds there. True enterprise is like Fortune 500. Like we don't sell into those companies yet. They need too many features from us. But the technology that they use is exactly the same thing that a Series A company or a seed stage company would use. It's very impressive in terms of that. So that is one thing. And then it's also just like how random. Like I've talked to people. I talked to this one guy that uses Index and he runs 10 bars in, I don't want to mess this up, but I think it's North Carolina, and he uses to track inventory, and he has a database. And I was like, sir, you do not need us. Like you really don't. Like, you're a nerd, and like you love to do this, but it's like, it's really like, yeah, it's very random. And so my point is that you'd be surprised how advanced, people are in terms of like the use cases, and also like across everything, locations, roles. Like, for example, like we work with a marketing guy that uses us for like reselling his data. He's a marketer, but he has like this database. He needs to create dashboards, and then he can share links to people. Guy is in like Macedonia, like, not doxing him, I mean, like, whatever. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, So anyways, that's my point. But then again, you also need to know your limits. So for example, we are not a good fit for some people that, for example, need marketing data, right? Like, hey, if you're a marketer in Kentucky, you need Shopify, we don't handle that right now, right? So it's like more like picking your lane and knowing like, hey, if you have a database or one of these connectors that we have, we are your team. If not, like, I'm sorry, it's like we cannot handle that. And for the longest time, we haven't, for example, you couldn't upload CSVs to Index until very recently. And I had a lady from Department of Transportation in some city in the US message me every 6 months, like, hey, can you do this? Because I need to create this. And I was like, lady, I'm so sorry, I don't have that. So we were not the right market for those people. Even if we are now, I'm sure there are other use cases that we don't handle today. So it's just like being comfortable saying no, like, which is hard, by the way, as a founder, especially when people want to give you money. Because you're like, oh, but I could make more revenue, and I could hit my target if I just build CSVs for this lady and everyone else like her. But I was like, and again, I failed at this terrible. I mean, my co-founder could tell you about this, because you want to say yes. It's a classic meme of like, salesperson says yes, and then engineering has to build it. Yeah, you have to kind of like say no and be comfortable knowing who you are. But the market's huge, basically. And I surprise myself every day with how massive and big the use case is,
And it sort of goes to show sort of something that I guess you've been thinking about, or something that's important to what you're doing, which is as a co-founder, as a head of the company, is like you've got to find how to reconcile speed with quality and scope and those kinds of things. So can definitely see that. Okay, so I want to now, I guess, change gears to fundraising, like ask you a couple questions about fundraising. So when you were starting out, how were you thinking about fundraising?
Fundraising is one of those things where by the way, I love talking about this. My co-founder hates, like, he could not, which honestly gives him so much aura, because like he could not care who's our, anything. Like, he does not care. And he would tell you the same thing. In my case, I enjoy it. I will say the disclaimer is like, if you took an audit of my calendar, and my mental bandwidth, I probably spend less than sub 1% of my time thinking about fundraising. Maybe to a fault, probably. So it doesn't consume a lot of my time. I do enjoy talking about it though. So, because people love to ask. So how I thought about it at the beginning was, dude, I'm a nerd. Like, I literally was running this thing like March Madness bracket. I never have done one of those, but I ran it like the World Cup. I was like, okay, let's just make a list and just like go from bottom to top. It's like, hey, you start a league and you're at the bottom. Americans won't get this, but Europeans would. Or you start at the bottom, you go all the way to the top, trying to make it and win the championship. And yeah, I was like, hey, let me just like stack all these investors and just take as many meetings as I can. And going back to the original point that I talked to you, I don't know if before we started rolling the camera, but around like it's a comedy, like a bit of a comedy special you're trying to put together, you start in like small clubs and like somewhere outside of California, and then you make your way up all the way to like, hey, you're performing at Madison Square Garden or, Chase Center or whatever it is. And those are your big firms, you won't get it right. I messed up and I'll never forget this. And I'm happy saying the name because they're incredible. I loved a fund called First Round Capital. And I did a rookie mistake where they're great. They invested in Notion, a bunch of other companies. They're really, really good. And I made the mistake that they were one of the first, 10 pitches that I did, and it was bad. It was really, really bad. Like, I just did not, I just didn't have it like tight, it was not tight. But it was an intro through it, like from a friend, and like I messed up the scheduling and like whatever. So that one fell through the cracks, but it's like at that point, like you're just running, you're trying to go as fast as possible and just get it done. And so I feel that also affects a little bit the dynamic. But yeah, it was very, very stressful. Like, I mean, every company has their stories, but I don't think people like from our perspective, we had like a term sheet sign at one point. Imagine you sign a term sheet. It was for $1 million, and this is someone I cannot say, but they are well regarded in the venture community. And he pulled out of the term sheet because he got a call from another startup founder, which I'm not going to comment on how that company is doing, but you can imagine from my tone how it's not necessarily, doing great, and that he thought it could be a conflict, essentially. And so he recused, which is very rare, by the way. Like, you have a sign. Imagine you're fundraising, and $1 million at that point was like half of a round, and, like, hey, you signed the term sheet. Cheers, cheers, cheers. We crushed. Yeah, let's go back to building. Well, like, let's finish the round. But, we were probably going to raise like 1.5 or something. So it's pretty much done, especially if that big check is in. And then they're like, psych, go back, start from the beginning. And then you went from being like a hot company that is going to close the round to basically like, a distressed asset, as some financial folks would say. And that was, it was crazy, dude. It was like, because we had I cannot say the fund, but because that same founder called the fund that invested in, in him. And it's your favorite fund for anyone that's into the venture world, is like whomever. It's the fund you're thinking about when you're like, oh, I wish they invested in me. And we're going to have a partner meeting with them on Monday. And they were like, yeah, like this guy called and we don't want to do the conflict stuff. So you went from like, hey, I'm going to close the round. I have this fund interested in doing a partner meeting on Monday, to be like on Monday at 8 a.m. to getting calls from everyone at 9 a.m. Hey, psych, we're all out. We figured it out, and we were very lucky. We ended up, raising more money on better terms from, frankly, better investors. Not to diss, but the most senior probably people you can get. So it worked out, but boy, was it stressful. It was like, not that part was not fun. And then afterwards, like, yeah. But anyways, that's like the fundraising story. It's like, it's a problem. It's like in hindsight, you see it from the outside. It's like, oh, super smooth curve, like. But in the moment, you're like, dude, like this is brutal. Like, it is just like so hard. Like cognitively, it's like, because like it's also, you see some other people, like we went through Y Combinator, and you see people crushing. Like, it's like, oh, we had like, yeah, Andreessen Horowitz, I'm fine saying this, Andreessen Horowitz gave us a term sheet for, whatever money on however much post, and you're like, I'm dumb. Like, you're like, how can I not figure this out? Like, this cannot be that hard. Then again, like, then you check in on that company 2 years later, and it's like, belly up, and the people that you think are dumbasses are crushing then. So you're like, it's very, very hard to predict this type of stuff. And in the moment, it messes up with your mental game a little bit. So yeah, anyways, it is tough, but it's definitely something that's good because it forces you to be like, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? So it's good. It's good for you as a founder to kind of like go through that process. It's just tough, You have to kind of like completely like basically put everything else on pause, Get it done and then get back to work.
Totally. I can see how it can be sort of a performative thing. You have to kind of put on a show, and
it's brutal. It's brutal. It drains your battery a lot. It's very frustrating when people don't do their homework. I think most VCs are a net negative, like 90% of them, or neutral at best. Yeah, I think but I think that's how the market works, like it's the game of the field, so you cannot complain, you just got to play the game. But it's like some investors are just like, They're so bad, dude. Like they're so bad. They're not prepared. They don't care enough. They're not curious enough, which is the worst part, I think. But again, it's your job as a founder to make them care. You know, so I don't take most no's personally. I take a few personally, and I want to make sure those folks don't sleep at night. Knowing how much money they lost or did not make. But for the most part, it's like you cannot take it personally. You just have to be better. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, just to wrap this VC and fundraising convo up, is like, what was specifically the hardest part mentally? Was it the rejection? Was it seeing others succeeding when you were, kind of down? Like, was it convincing investors who didn't care about funding your baby type thing? Or what was like the hardest thing mentally?
I think for the first fundraise or for the latter fundraises, because like I think the calculation changes.
Let's do. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, because like I can imagine the first fundraise, you're just like trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
The latter ones were probably more emotionally draining, maybe.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll do the latter.
I think I'll give you the best, like the hardest one is when you raise. Again, you make so many mistakes as a first-time founder, I think. One of the mistakes is not staying as close to investors. Again, I also understand why. It's like I have to make the company work. I cannot be like schmoozing with my investors all day, nor would I want to. But they're great. I love them all. But I think the toughest one. So we raised whatever $3 million or something like that. And we just got back to work, and then at some point we needed more capital, but we had not hit the milestones yet to raise a big round. Typically, you would call that a bridge round. Those are very tough, very tough because you are, again, dude, like as a company we've gone through so much. It's crazy. Like in hindsight, like you look at it, you're like, I don't know how they're alive, and how they've done well. Because like, for example, at that point we are like, we're going to have to raise more money, but one of our main so the idea is like, hey, typically your insiders are the ones that will double down just to keep the company alive. It's a very hard equation for them, by the way. I don't envy that because, not to bore your audience, but essentially VCs have to think about first investment, like first checks versus like reserves. And depending on how old the fund is and a bunch of other dynamics, how they've deployed into their winners or whatever, they have to keep reserves for follow-on checks. And ideally that is just for the winners, But sometimes you need to bridge a company. Some of the best companies needed a bridge to kind of like prove enough and then hit the gas. But you don't know, like you really, like the equation could also be like, hey, I'm putting more money in a loser, which is not great. So anyways, that is a tough, I don't envy that part. And so for us, that one was hard because it was not just like, hey, we need to kind of like go and ask for more money from our insiders. Which a lot of them I had not a close relationship with, necessarily. And so that was hard. And also at the same time, one of our largest investors was going through some turmoil internally. And so they could not participate as I thought they were going to. So it was like scrambling to find that cash somewhere else. Obviously, we got it done. And then since, raised more. But it's hard. That one was very tough because it goes from like... Usually when you hear founders talk, it's like, oh, we pitch 100 people. Well, yeah, but it's like I realistically could only pitch 20, and that is tough, man. Because the feeling of that is like, oh, I have a ton of chances as a first-time founder. No one has heard of you. No one is like, But you don't want to go out to those same funds later and you don't want to go to new funds with bad metrics, You want to make sure it's like you're crushing, you're as strong as you can. So that you're a little bit against the wall because it's like you have a very limited and we pitched to new investors. They all passed, I think, at the time. Since then, obviously, like we've done better and fundraised more. But like at the time, that was a very hard round to put together. And that was why you can only pitch your insiders, and it's like I mean, it is, and there's also the internal dynamics of if how much is that investor putting in, I'm gonna match them, and like, it's yeah. There's a lot of internal politics that goes into this type of stuff, but we got it done, and that one I think is really hard, really hard, and I feel like that's where a lot of people quit, to be honest, because the equation doesn't even make sense in your head, to be honest. You know, like it's pretty tough. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the last point that I would say is like, from an investor's point of view, I would imagine it's like it's hard to assess the risk of an additional investment, and even just like just like investing in startups in general is just like, well, what do I have to assess, whether or not this
It's
is a good
really tough.
investment. Okay, so and then I guess to wrap up, by the way, thank you so much again for kind of coming on. This was so much fun. You're awesome, man. You're serious. I can see the stand-up comedy, skill set as well in there.
I would suck doing stand-up. Like I love to watch it. I'm actually like funny enough. I'm going to see like John Mulaney with my girlfriend tomorrow. I think he's coming in town. I've never seen him, so it's fun. I love comedy. Again, went to school in New York. Probably top comedy scene I think in the world. Like, dude, like would go to Comedy Cellar and like just one time like whatever. Like Chappelle came in like randomly. I mean the crowd just like crazy. So anyways, I enjoy the whole aspect of it. It's just like it's kind of like a reminder of like take your work seriously but not yourself maybe. But yeah, anyway, sorry. You were saying last question.
No, that's awesome. And then I guess last question is, so where do you see yourself and where do you see your company in like 5 to 10 years, long term? What's the vision? Where do you see yourself?
So how can I articulate this eloquently? So let's work like the way I think about it is what is like the winning equation, right? Like what is the success criteria? What does winning the video game look like? And like let's work backwards from there to figure out what do we need to do, what timelines, whatever. The idea and the vision and the goal is always to build that $10 billion company that can go public. And the more I think about it, the reason why I like to do that is because it's fun. It's like fun intellectual pursuit. Like I love doing other stuff. I like running. I've gone into lifting this year, not to brag. But I love scuba diving. I mean, growing up in the DR. I don't care about those things as much. They're not as intellectually stimulating anymore. Figuring out the company building feels like a puzzle, and it feels very engaging and very high stakes. And so that is success criteria. So it's like, okay, we want to build a $10 billion company because we can. It's fun. We think we can build something people actually use and find useful, and we're gonna make a lot of people a lot of money, and we hopefully can, retire a bunch of people somewhere into they can ride into the sunset. Amazing. So if that's the success criteria, is like, what do we need to do to get there, right? It's like the core product has to work, the distribution has to be there, and the acts 2 and 3 of the company have to be very, very clear. Meaning, what are like the second and third products that can get you there? It's pretty tough to get to $1 billion in revenue, which is what you would need to working backwards to that 10 billion valuation. It's hard to get to $1 billion on one product. Not to say impossible, but pretty hard. So it's like that. Those are kind of like the very basic things, that you kind of have to work on. So it's like, yeah, hopefully that takes me less than 10 years to do. But yeah, that's honestly like the goal. And just kind of like making sure that we're always optimizing for the right thing, kind of like, driving the boat in the right direction, which is like that outcome. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, by the way, I never, this is like the other funny thing is like when it gets hard, like you're always like, oh my God, it would be so great if we could get acquired, or like I know because I have a lot of conversations like this with close founder friends and just like acquaintances where they're like, oh, dude, like if I could only get acquired. And I was like, what are you gonna do, dude? Like you're definitely just gonna go back and try and run the video game again, like so it's like, hey, just like figure it out once, do it well, and then we'll figure it out, what the next leg looks like, which could be interesting and have some thoughts on that. But it's like for now, let's just focus on the game, which is like get to that, have a big impact, because that should give you enough confidence and resources and whatever to do the next big thing you want to do, you know? But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, one final note on fun. I'm reminded of sort of a Shoe Dog, a book by Phil Knight.
Love it. I read that on a plane, actually, on a JFK to SFO. Love it. We'll never forget. It's a great book, you know? I was so invested in the 1970s shoemaking, you know, and athletics world in a way that I did not think I was going to be. But yeah.
Totally. I mean, I read it in like 2017, and in the beginning of the book, he was talking about, you know, how he got his start or whatever, and he really said, like, you know, what I want out of my life is to have fun.
Yeah.
So
it's like one of the few things that you can keep kind of like going to the well for, you know, and like it will, like, listen, I'm sure like I think cash is great, and I think it can cover a lot of things, but it's hard to keep that being the only thing, you know, like if it's such a long marathon, you know, that it's like at some point you just need something more, you know, to kind of like drive you. And it's a long race, by the way. It's not like you're going to be doing 3 years where you can just grind it out. It's not an investment banking job, you know? You kind of like really have to enjoy this, because like, again, especially when stuff gets hard, it's like that's when I think it really helps, you know, when you can kind of like stay a little even keeled, you know, because otherwise it's just brutal, you know. It is really, really tough. So it's like, yeah, try to enjoy it as much as you can, you know, and like, and I think you'll hopefully have, you know, some endurance in this race. But yeah.
awesome. Well, Xavier, thanks again, man. This was a blast. Thanks, brother.
But this is fun. I mean, again, you can invoice me for the therapy session, because like this feels like very selfish usually. You know, you're just like talking about yourself and just kind of like reminiscing a little bit and kind of like trying to, you know, think about things you've not thought about in a long time. But yeah, this was really fun, dude. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so did I, man. All right. Thanks so much, man.